we were about to start off, and it's a good place to start. You were telling us that the debt to GDP ratio in this country now is 120%. So
Yeah, that's a bit alarming. As I began to say, but there's a point at which the International Monetary Fund deems a country to be at risk. Financially, if they're at 77% GDP ratio to debt, that is the alarm point at which they begin to get concerned that financial stability is becoming questionable for that country. 77% of the money coming in being spent on debt is a problem. Our country is now at 120% of the GDP to debt. So that means every dollar that the United States government brings in from either bond sales or tax revenue, we're spending $1.20. A dollar comes in, but we spend $1.20. So and that seems unsustainable.
So say round numbers, 4 trillion comes in, 20 times 4, 20%. So we spend 1.8, 4.8 rather.
4.8, correct.
4.8, wow.
And we're doing this on top of the existing amount of debt, the existing growth of interest payments on the debt because rates have gone up, which is now about $1.5 trillion a year.
Is it really that much? You had mentioned that before.
That much.
1.5 trillion per year in interest payments. Let that puppy sink in, boy. Whoa.
32 trillion in debt at 5%. You can do the math. That's exactly what it would come out to be. And that seems to be about the average rate of debt that we're paying. And the problem is that as interest rates go up, the carrying cost of the debt also increases, which puts a lot more pressure on the government to have to raise more money. So we're in a kind of a precarious position, but the alarming rate, which was released at 120% GDP to debt ratio, has begun to concern a lot of foreign investors. And it has thwarted what had been a huge dollar rally that had gone on since the summer. With the dollar had achieved levels it hadn't been at in 20 years.
Right.
It had been rising against the world's foreign currencies to a level where the index of that dollar that we look at, the IDX, had hit about 115. It's slowly been dropping, but we're down to about 105 now, indicating a sustained loss in, let's say, confidence in the US dollar. And the more that the debt ratio grows, the more concerned foreign investors will become about our ability to repay our debt.
So is that what controls, Fred, the USD index that was 115 that is now 106? Is confidence from foreign investors and other people,
absolutely.
Hedge funds or whatever?
If I were a conspiracy-minded person, one might argue that there was a concerted effort by central banks around the world over the summer and early fall to drive up the value of the dollar. In other words, let's say, again, if I were a conspiracy-minded person,
a tinfoil hat guy, yeah, I understand.
One could argue that there was some sort of a secret meeting. Everybody agreed that they would support the dollar, buy dollars very heavily across the end of the summer and fall to drive up the dollar's value. And I think that would have been in anticipation of the quantitative tightening that is now going to go on through the Fed, which seems to have been a somewhat forgotten problem that we're going to be addressing coming into 2023. And I think the concern is that if the government is bleeding money at this massive pace, and the country is running 120% GDP to debt ratio, and the Fed is now entertaining the idea that it's going to try to sell off from its monster-sized balance sheet all of these bonds that it bought during the quantitative easing process.
When they were buying things, right?
Buying, right? So in other words, they were throwing money at the Treasury, absorbing all of the bonds that they could buy in order to push liquidity into the open market. And then the Fed would take those bonds and throw it on its balance sheet with the intention at some future point to turn around and sell them. But the amount that they accumulated to stimulate economic growth during the COVID crisis was so massive that it's just mathematically difficult to see how it would unwind in any short period of time. And even over 2, 3, or 4 years, it seems almost fundamentally impossible. But the Fed is saying it's going to start instituting this quantitative tightening. So it's now going to try to dump trillions of dollars worth of bonds back into the open market. And my question is, who's big enough to absorb that quantity of debt when the U.S. government is simultaneously trying to raise $1.5 trillion a year in new debt because it has to cover the interest payments on its existing debt issue?
It's not even logical what they're talking about, right? It's not even. Yeah.
It's rather confusing. And first of all, it's never been done. Quantitative tightening is a brand new process. It's never been tried before by a central bank. So this is sort of an economic experiment that could easily go awry. But I think subtly we're going to begin to see pressure on the U.S. dollar. And if I'm, suspicious enough or conspiracy-minded enough, one could argue that this recent dollar rally was a precursor to the knowledge that this was about to begin. But, we'll only know about that historically.
I'm looking here now this morning as of, actually today or yesterday, a few days ago, $5.5 trillion of U.S. Treasury bonds, U.S. Treasury securities are on the balance sheet. $5.5 trillion. Whoa.
Right.
Whoa. That's a lot.
So, how much per month? 400 billion, 500 billion. How many months would that take? 10, 12 months of selling at that pace? And who is out there with that kind of revenue to absorb that amount of debt? So is there a plan out there that we're strong-arming foreign countries to say, listen, we're going to start unwinding this balance sheet and we need you guys to support?
Yeah, I don't see that. Do you? I mean, if you look at the numbers of China and Japan and Saudi Arabia, everybody, it's been kind of going down a little bit, if anything. They've been selling a little bit, right?
China's been facing their own, and they're facing their own internal problems with their own currencies have been so weak. So, a lot of them bought dollars as a safe haven and found themselves having to absorb quantities of U.S. dollars just to help stabilize the fall in their own currencies.
Right.
So in that environment, without the Federal Reserve being the end buyer of the bonds like they were during quantitative easing, my question is, where does all this money come from? And if we're going to play the game that we've been playing the past 12 years now, since roughly 2008, I'm going to say that we're going to print our way out of this problem the way we have others. And I really am very disconcerted by this, that this has now become a normal option. Printing our way out of economic problems should be an option of last resort, an emergency process, not something that becomes the standard. We now do it every day, like, oh yeah, we'll just print more money to solve that problem, and we'll print more money to solve this problem, and we'll just keep inflating the crap out of dollars ad infinitum until we can get a handle and control over the levels at which we're manipulating the economy. But the numbers, they're kind of big.
Well, as Andy's classic saying was, whenever he talked about people going to crash, he said, remember what he used to say? Oh, it's not going to crash until they run out of zeros. Maybe he was right. That they're just going to keep running this thing until, what do we just storm the castle with pitchforks? And when milk is $15 a gallon? I don't know.
I don't know either. But, little by little, if they can continue to pull these games off and perpetrate the idea that somehow they're going to manage this, then the confidence will remain. But my concern is that the farther away we move from reality, the farther we get from reasonableness.
Right.
And any reasonable person looking at a government that's, spending $1.20 for every dollar it brings in is going to be no more comfortable with that than an individual who's spending more money than they bring in with all their income.
Right.
At some point, you're not going to be a willing loaner to somebody if you don't foresee that there's any possibility they could ever repay that debt.
And it doesn't seem, I don't know, just from the cheap seats here, Fred Dashevsky, that if they're going to continue to raise interest rates, which is really the only thing the Fed can do, and then buy bonds. They can buy stuff and then raise interest rates, right? Those are their two main tools. They can buy mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. And then if the gross domestic product is really slumpy because they're running out of money because of inflation, right? And they're building credit. Have you seen some of the consumer credit numbers? Man, credit cards, people are they're running on empty.
Well,
So,
they're spending a lot of money, that's for sure.
yeah,
So we are at least seeing some economic activity in the United States, unlike Europe and Asia, where the COVID shutdowns in China have caused lots of problems that are bleeding over to U.S. companies that sell product to China. We're seeing slowdowns around the world. The one benefit we've had in the United States is the consumer is still spending money. They may be doing it by raising debt on their credit card,
they are, I
but there's
think.
activity in the economy, and that helps.
But then, where I was going with it, Fred, is that you just don't see there. There's no way. There's no there as far as going back to normal, whatever that is there? I mean, what could initiate it politically or federal central bank actions to change
Well,
the
there's only one
mechanism, to
thing.
change the trajectory? You know what I'm asking? What would change?
Yes, I do. And there only is one option. That is
What's
a
that?
budget surplus.
Oh,
That is a government running a budget surplus. So in
Not
other
gonna
words,
happen,
if
right?
somehow the government can manage to control its deficit spending, the interest on the debt, all its current expenditures, and generate enough revenue, whether that be from, tax revenue or sales, or increase the GDP, if we can get back to a point where we had in 2001, which was a false environment, but they did at least say we had a budget surplus. That was Clinton's game of taking Social Security's
Right,
available fund and throwing it on top of the general budget and then calling that, oh, look, we have extra money, so we'll call that a surplus. But even given that nonsense, if you argue there was a surplus in 2001, that allows the government to bring down these numbers and change the direction and trajectory. If we don't have budget surpluses and continue to run budget deficits, then we continue on this track. And this problem is going to get progressively worse because it's going to force two things: higher interest payments, lower amounts of available capital to the general public, and an increasing need of the government to raise revenue one way or the other, which, the way I see it, printing our way out of the problem seems to be the choice of method to deal with this issue, which means effectively we can expect our US dollar to buy a lot less in the next 5 years than it's buying now. And I would think that's going to drive the value of physical assets significantly higher in the next 5 years.
Huh. You're not making an argument that gold could go up in value in the next 5 years, are you?
I do.
Yeah,
I do believe that we've seen a lot of manipulation in gold this year. We're pretty much flat for the year. And given everything that we've done this year, that's amazing. But again, we had a false dollar rally, again, perpetrated by weakness around the world that left people with little option but to look at the U.S. dollar as a safe haven. But that confidence in the U.S. dollar is fading. And I think the more that people look, independently at the status of the U.S. dollar situation, it's not going to be a comfortable environment for them to say, this is my safe haven bet. I don't feel as if I say to you, you're safe, Patrick, putting your long-term capital in U.S. dollars right now, put it in the bank, let them pay whatever minimal interest, and 5 years from now, you'll be good having done that. I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah. And politically, there's a whole lot of stuff going on with China and other places, Saudi Arabia, that is not good for this country, where they're in no mood to really be helping us. I mean, they just aren't.
No.
This administration's out there bad mouthing China every chance they get. They're the villain along with Russia. So
We're
is
not making
over.
it easy, that's for sure.
No,
I mean,
no.
if we want to start adding the political nonsense, if you will, that has to go along with all this stuff.
It makes it
So
crazy.
we have to walk this tightrope of, keeping everybody around the world comfortable with the idea of stockpiling U.S. dollars, and subsequently, politically not pissing them off so that they have any incentives to want to push back against using U.S. dollars. But, again, by default, there aren't a lot of options left. I just find it, a little disheartening that we are left as a nation with a country that has a currency system that's under this kind of pressure. It's been manipulated so hard the past few years. And every once in a while, the gap between, what they'd like us to believe and reality catch them by surprise, so to speak. And, we get these massive movements in the currency values and the value of things like gold and silver.
Yeah.
But I think the next few years going forward are going to be pretty difficult for the Fed to manage this interesting game plan they have. They're like a football coach. They've got their game plan and they're going to try to run it, but it doesn't.
What else
mean
are they
that
going to do, right? What else are they going to do? Because but there's no way you could. Well, I guess there's a way, but I don't see it feasible that the government could get in there and cut $1.5 trillion off of their yearly expenditures. Where's that going to come from? I mean, how do they?
Not without any political.
Oh my God!
Backwash, right? So, are they going to cut some sort of government services to that degree? Are they going to, stop doing these bailouts and stop burning money for every problem that comes up? Since I don't see that they have very many other options, I don't think this is going to come to an end in that way. And I just think that we're going to be looking 5 years from now, and we shouldn't be surprised that there was a massive explosion in the quantity of money that exists and continued government intervention and central bank intervention trying to sustain this game that we're playing and hoping that the public does not see the gap between perception and reality.
Well, they see it. I mean, you can see some of the blogs out there. There's people that are on this, and they know. Lots of folks know what's going on. Well, Fred Dashevsky's with us. Patrick Timpone, OneRadioNetwork.com. So it feels like this whole petrodollar thing with you'll sell your oils for dollars and then you can use those dollars to buy our treasuries, right? That was the model, wasn't it? Pretty much.
Sure.
For a long time. And that's just fading away. That's all just fading away.
Well, remember, oil had been the world's commodity. Since around the 1940s or so, you could suggest that the commodity in the world that represented everything that mattered was oil. It represented everything because it provided all the energy for every country and every facet you can think of. So the producers of oil and those that controlled oil, they became the key players. Mm-hmm. We obviously saw this, develop in the 1970s, the response of the oil-producing countries when, we indicated to the world after 1971 that we force-fed dollars to oil-producing countries since the end of World War II, since the 1940s, forcing them to stockpile dollars because we required the oil reserves to be paid for in U.S. dollars. And then suddenly now, having forced them to stockpile all these dollars, we suddenly tell them that these dollars are no longer backed by anything tangible, and they're just supposed to accept that. And they responded. And the response was massive. We saw the price of oil and gas increase in the United States to a point where it became part of the inflationary problem in the early 70s. And the pushback was huge. And oil remained the resource, the commodity of the world until the last, let's say, 8 or 9 years, where it has now been taken over for the first time since the 1940s. The new commodity in the world is information. It is now the number one commodity around the world. The selling of your data for all the little bits and dips and gyps of data that are taken from you for every internet search and every web that you go to and everything that you touch on the World Wide Web, all the resources to gather that information, resell it, package it, and market it. The information has now taken over oil as the number one resource around the world. But we're still fighting a problem where if we push back too hard and create problems to the people that control the energy around the world, there's going to be some issues, and we are dependent on it. So we have to balance this act between keeping that aggressive demand for the U.S. dollar sustainable, not pissing off the people that produce all the energy, and yet, not create a problem where we lose control over the ability to control the value of money. This is an unusual circumstance that we're in. It's really unprecedented.
We're really in the middle of it, aren't we? And no matter what one says about this Green New Deal and all this stuff that they're trying to foment, in my opinion, oil is going to be around as the major juice for a long time. It just is.
I think so too. I think it'll be a long time before we ever get off that, oil teat. And obviously then the control over the quantity of oil that is produced is going to provide for some an awful lot of leverage and power in the world's economic environment. And, that's fine. Those that have it can control it, and that's okay. It's just a question of dependency of the United States. And, again, it relates to the U.S. dollar because we have made this requirement since World War II that, dollar and oil are related as gold and oil and dollars are. So I just worry about going forward how this is all going to play out. And then, as we move forward too, what happens as we move more into the digital world. So, the idea of central banks and digital currencies coming out of central banks starts to also to become a new issue that we have to address. And little by little, I think it's probably going to be a decade out, but we may eventually see the paper money that we have used fade away, and it all turns into digital currency. And at that point, the problem, as I see it, just grows.
Yeah.
We lose complete control over our economy.
I don't think it's going to be that long myself, my opinion. I don't think it's going to be that long, but you may be right. But, to add to this, Biden went over to Saudi Arabia, 3 or 4 months ago, wanting more oil, and it was a very muted kind of a little, they bumped fist and that was it, and you're out of here. And then they said, no, we're not going to do anything. Now they got Xi, that dude to China, going over there for a 3-day massive visit. I mean, they're making a big deal out of it, red carpets and bands. And
sure.
So he knows what's going on. He knows where the oil is, and it's a Chinese guy. And that's why he's over there, right? And they're going to do some deals, big deals.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. And then, so we're going to have to see how the powers play out. It is a power play, and we're just sort of left languishing here, waiting for the onslaught of whatever the results are going to be. But, I always harken back to how does this affect the U.S. dollar? And if we can continue to put pressure on foreign countries to, maintain those dollar reserves, all will be fine, as they say, right?
Yeah. If you'd like to be on the show, you can email us, patrick1radionetwork.com. Oh, you already answered this, but it's a good question. Jeremy says, so why hasn't, I bought some gold a few years ago, but why hasn't it gone up in value if all this is so out of control? Thanks. That's a good question. Kind of explain to Jeremy why. The gold has really been flat, the spot price, right? But that doesn't mean that what you have, Jeremy, is not a good deal. You should hang on, right?
Oh, yeah. The idea that gold has sustained its price throughout this year is actually pretty impressive. A lot of things have also gone, poorly throughout the year. I mean, not that I put them in the same category, but the cryptos are down 65% this year. And, the Dow is also pretty much flat for the year. But the rationale, the reason why we haven't seen more upward movement in the price of gold in U.S. dollar terms is that the dollar rallied tremendously in the summer and fall. So it wasn't because the dollar had actually gotten stronger domestically. It wasn't because things had improved. It wasn't because the government was doing a better job sustaining the value of money or, controlling deficit spending or anything positive. It was just that relative to the rest of the world, we looked pretty good. And it forced people that had wealth outside the U.S. to buy U.S. dollars as a default. And that left the dollar strengthening against other currencies. And by default, the dollar rallying against other world currencies meant in dollar terms, gold prices went down. So at one point, maybe 2 months ago, when the dollar peaked at about 115 on that index, gold was around 1,630 per ounce in U.S. dollars. Today, we're at $1,780 in U.S. dollar terms per ounce for gold. So it's gone up quite a bit since the dollar rally began to fade, and it is only because the dollar rallied against world currencies this year that gold did not move up more. But I don't think people should translate that to mean that there was really no benefit to holding gold. It clearly sustained its buying power this year, which by itself is a very powerful asset to have. And going forward, I think the inflation problem will drive the dollar value down across the world's currencies, and we will see gold prices climb going forward.
So you think this the dollar going down now? Do you think it's going to be on the way down from here, or what's your take on
I think
that?
it's more likely that the dollar is going to continue to fade because I think what drove it up is coming to an end. And I think we're going to have to face some reality. I think once quantitative tightening starts, I think that is going to be a very large variable on the impact of the entire U.S. economy. I think it's bigger than most people are anticipating. I think the size of this problem has sort of become, a back-paced issue that people are not really paying attention to. It's got put on the back burner to the point where it's almost being ignored. And this is natural. I mean, we are living in a world where every day, every 5 minutes, there's quote unquote breaking news, or, the current news story of the day, or whatever's absorbing people's mindset for short term. And they sort of forget what's happening on the broader picture behind the scenes. And quantitative tightening has sort of gone unnoticed for a while. It was a big problem that people were paying attention to as the Fed began to announce how they planned to deal with it, but then it sort of got lost in translation, if you will. And I think it's going to turn out to be one of the biggest problems we face going forward. I find it very difficult to understand how the Fed can take $5 trillion worth of bonds and potentially sell that back into an open market of an economy when simultaneously the government has $1.5 trillion worth of debt every year that it's adding to, that it has to somehow raise revenue to pay. So while we have a government that needs to raise huge amounts of money on a monthly basis, simultaneously the Fed is going to try to unwind its balance sheet. My question is, what entity is large enough to absorb trillions of dollars worth of bonds? I don't know that there's anything out there that big. And that means that we're going to probably end up printing our way out of this problem, just like we printed our way out of every other issue since 2008.
So what you're saying is, and what looks like it's going to happen, they're not going to do anything with what they've got, and they're just going to buy more, and that's going to cause inflation to continue to go, right? It has to, right?
Well, I think, the Fed is going to make an effort. They insist that they're going to try to unwind this balance sheet.
Yeah, well,
so they're going to
they say a lot
do
of
the reverse.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just don't know how this functions. I really am struggling trying to get my head wrapped around how they plan to do that. It would be difficult enough if the Fed was not trying to unwind its balance sheet simultaneously when the government has to raise the amount of money it has to raise. Even the government's needs to raise $1.5 trillion a year to cover the interest payments alone would be problematic by itself. That would be enough to raise my eyebrow of concern. But we're going to do that at the same time the Fed is going to try to unwind its balance sheet. And I just find this problematic. So it just seems to me the default process has always been one way or the other. However they, create the mechanism, whether they come up with something brand new or use one of the old standards, it's going to print, and the public be damned. And if we inflate the value out of money, well, so be it, because we don't have any other choice.
But there has to be I don't know if there has to be, but then we say that there is a tipping point where the people just have had enough for the rising prices. I mean, no?
Yep, and by default, what they do is, if they lose confidence in the dollar, they start buying other assets.
Okay.
I've talked about this, why do people look at cryptos, as weird as they are, or why do people look at these other alternative areas? If the dollar were a stable currency, there would be no need to look elsewhere. But the fact that we have these problems makes people concerned, and it makes people wonder whether or not they're being prudent in having money sitting in bank accounts. I mean, we're hearing from a lot of people that are sitting on an awful lot of capital, and month after month, that concern is growing to the point where they're coming to the conclusion they need to diversify their wealth. And this is the way I would suggest that people approach this. We don't really know going forward exactly what's going to happen. We can speculate, and we've been pretty good about estimating the onslaught of what's happening just based on the numbers of what the Fed has been doing. But every once in a while, we get thrown a few curveballs. COVID was something we didn't anticipate before it happened. And the results of how the economy would be post-COVID, or what the government would do to respond to COVID. None of those things could have been anticipated. And it turned out to be the most significant economic issue since 2020. So for 2 years, the economy has been dominated by an event nobody could have foreseen. What are we going to see 2 years from now or 3 years from now? Will there be any other black swan or exogenous events that come up? And if there aren't, how are we going to address what we've already done? Again, I harken back to this, and I know I've said this 100 times. We are still dealing with what we did in 2008. That crisis was so massive that the cost of it is still being paid for in today's dollars. On top of that, we've now added what we've done since 2020, and I believe 10 years from now, God willing, you and I are still having these conversations in a decade, we will still be talking about the fact we're paying off what we did to address the issues from 2020. And I think the public has got to be mindful of the result of this. In most likely cases, is it will end up with a significantly weaker U.S. dollar. And I would absolutely encourage people to learn from history and say, just diversify your wealth. Make sure that at least something you're doing for your future isn't counting on this paper money to buy the same amount of goods and services in the future as it's buying today. I don't foresee how that is likely or even possible.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to argue that most folks do not understand, as you well know. Look at this election yesterday in Georgia. They elected a Democrat, and now Warnock, and so now they control the Senate. I think 51-49, and these folks are spending money like a drunken sailor, as the saying goes, right? And people didn't think about that when they voted for Warnock. I mean, they could have slowed it down a little bit, maybe voting for Walker, maybe, but
maybe. Again, there's political expediency, and you brought this up before about how we are addressing things like China and having meetings with the leaders of China and what's happening with Russia. So you've got political events that are taking hold. The problem becomes that if I elected you president tomorrow, whether you be Democrat or Republican, you face some pretty tough choices. And you're now looking at the books, and I'm showing you where we stand. And I'm saying to you, President Patrick, you have to decide, how do we address the problem? Somehow we have to slow down the spending, but somehow we have to keep the public happy. If we want to encourage people to vote for us, you got to give the public what they want. And everybody is at this point now where it's like, well, give me the money, show me the money, I want the money. That's all they care about.
Well,
they
I think President Patrick would do what he did in the screenplay that is getting quite a bit of notice, is you send in the Army, take over the Fed, print the United States notes, and just do that. And then you don't care about your second term because you just got to fix the thing. So,
well, there you go. Okay, so what you've done is you've ripped the Band-Aid off, right? Instead of slowly pulling this thing off over a period of time. As President Patrick, you're going to say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take the punch in the face. We're going to stand there, and let Mike Tyson in his heyday smack you right in the face. It's going to hurt like hell. You're going down to the canvas. You're not getting up. But you know what? The fight is over. It's done.
That's right.
And you have faced the beast. You've addressed the issue. It's going to be really horrific for a period of time, but the issue is done. But nobody in any kind of political venue these days has the balls to take that kind of hit.
Well, it's a work of fiction, what can I tell you?
Right. That's because no one has got the guts to be able to do that. And I don't think the public would really want us to do that per se, even though
they wouldn't, unless they really understood, Yeah,
it's kind of a hard thing to get people to recognize. Do you want to take this massive hit to the value of your money tomorrow for the sake of the future of the country? Or would you rather see the bleeding continue? I remember the Reagan years where we were about to cross the streams, as they said in Ghostbusters. Crossing the streams is bad. So the Reagan years was the first time that the U.S. government faced the overwhelming problem of the government was about to start spending more money than they were bringing in, and it was going to start putting pressure on the ability to repay debt, and they had a choice. They could have slammed on the brakes, in other words, stop government spending, and the economy would have gone to a hell of a stall, like an airplane, just pointing it straight up, and you're cutting out the engine, you're done. The thing is going to start plummeting down earth. It would have been ugly, it would have been hard for the public, but it would have dealt with the problem. The other option, step on the gas and spend like crazy, knowing that you're going to blow out the deficits in 5 years or 10 years, but also understanding politically, you'll be gone by the time the problem shows up and won't have to take the heat for it, except historically. But in the short term, you look like a hero because the economy is going to go gangbusters. We had the roaring 20s. And we had the roaring 80s, and they were very similar historically. They were a massive amount of government spending, stimulating economic activity. The public loved it because short term, it was the go-go 80s, lots of money available, cheap and readily available. People could borrow money for next to nothing, spend like crazy, and everybody felt wonderful about the economy. A few people stood up at that point and said, this is horrible. This is a bad choice. A few years from now, we're going to look back and feel like, what were we thinking? But that was the option then. And they chose the politically expedient option. I don't see anybody coming into, the current environment politically that's going to take on the idea of what you would do as president.
No, I don't think they wouldn't let him in, one, if they knew he had this in mind. Right?
No, who would want that? Who's going to take it if a political party comes and says to you, look, we're going to fix the economy, but you're going to hate us for 5 years. We're going to rip the value.
But let's look at that a second. Would my fictional screenplay, if you did that, why would things get bad? Why would things be bad all of a sudden? I mean,
Well, you're going to cause a massive amount of inflation. I mean, if you suddenly print all the money out of the Treasury to pay off all of the Federal Reserve
No. We wouldn't do that. What you would just do is have people trade in their Federal Reserve notes for United States notes, and then use the Federal Reserve notes to pay off the debt.
Okay. Well, again,
well,
that's a nice little game of it's like the shell game.
That's the thing that Andrew talked about for years, and is the premise of the screenplay. He talked about that 20 years ago.
And the idea is that at that point going forward, what you've accomplished, which would be wonderful in and of itself, is that the cost of future money would be controlled. So we're going to cut out the middleman going forward.
Yeah, just United States notes. Right.
Right. So instead of the government having to borrow money through the Fed, paying the Fed its interest payments and the gap between the cost of the printing and the face value of the seniorage, that all now gets governed and retained by the public instead of being distributed through the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah. And that's the fairest form of taxation, right? Just as you print more money, then prices go up a little bit. Yeah,
sure.
That's the fairest form of taxation you can get.
Yeah,
you could end the income tax. You could end the
income tax. And then at that point, theoretically, the public can say to the government, we want you to slow down your spending. And, again, we can control that a lot more because if we don't like what the government does in response to our public demand, now we can vote you out of office.
Yeah.
We have an option here. We can put somebody else in who at least believes they may have a plan that's better than yours. And if their plan doesn't work, well, then we throw you out and put somebody else in until somebody comes along that comes up with a solution that's palpable. So it does empower the people if we take out the Federal Reserve and we go back to U.S. Treasury issuing notes directly into the economy. That would be a powerful change.
Wow.
But in this world, do we really believe that the Federal Reserve bankers who have spent how far back you want to go. I mean, the battle of
1791, right? I mean,
1792, right? You're right. Do you want
first
to go
Bank
back
of the
that
United
far?
States, right?
Even if we want to talk about it from 1913,
Right.
where do you want to start? At some point, are these bankers that spent all of these decades gaining control over the issue of money, are they going to walk away?
No.
And suddenly say, oh, okay, yeah, you guys take this over and we'll just fade away to the background like we never existed. I don't.
No,
really
they
see
do
that.
a lot of stuff to our guy in the screenplay. They try to kick his ass every time he turns around, and that's what they would do. And they
Sure.
would do that.
Well,
And
they'd apply all kinds of pressure.
all kinds of stuff. They try to kill him, and they try to do a lot of things.
Yeah,
And they would
look
do
at
it.
the things we've done to other political people around the world
That
that
even
have ever
mess with it.
threatened the dollar status. We can
Right.
list that list is probably 5 pages long, and then we start getting into CIA conspiracies and all these kinds of things. Most of which historically now will probably turn out to have been truth.
Sure.
I
sure.
heard yesterday that they're about to release information on Lee Harvey Oswald and his relationship with the CIA.
We interviewed, let me fill you in. We interviewed a fellow who's been behind the whole movement to bring out
Oh, great.
from the marysomething.org about 2 weeks ago. Morley is his name. And I think on December 10th, he said this is the date that they have to do it. Or they're supposed to do it, but both Biden, Fred, and Trump refused to do it, both of them. So they're not sure. Have you seen anything saying they are going to release it?
No, all I've
Okay.
seen is that this was the purported date they were supposed to.
December
and
10th,
We're
correct.
already hearing rumors that they're trying
They're
to
not.
come up with some rationale to say
Right.
we can't or we won't.
Right.
But,
right.
Just think about how long it's been. It was
I know.
November 22nd, 1963. This is December 7th, 2022.
I know.
We're still waiting for that information to come
Yeah.
public. My
And-
point being, I don't see the Federal Reserve bankers fading away quietly if President Patrick takes over and tries to retain the issue of money coming directly from the Treasury. And just so that the public understands this, what you're discussing here is the idea that, in theory, the U.S. Treasury Department has all of the authority it needs to directly print money.
It does.
It does not need to sub that job out through a privately owned central bank.
It does.
We do this for the expediency of having this central bank be a backstop to the U.S. banking system and to provide support for the U.S. dollar. And their job requirement is to sustain the value of money and to maintain a low level of unemployment. My question is, since 1913, how would we assess their job? How would we assess how well they're doing?
Just a mess. Just a mess.
Well, the dollar has lost 98% of its value. Since
That's
1913.
crazy when you think about it, isn't it? 98% of its value. Wow.
Right, gone.
Boo.
And remember, until 1971, 72, 73, let's say you wanted to buy an ounce of gold. What would it have cost you in 1971 or 72? It would have been about $35 for an ounce of gold.
Right.
And today it would cost you, about $1,800 to buy the same ounce of gold. Why has the price changed? Why is the value of the same quantity of gold continually increasing against the quantity of dollars? It's because we have nothing constraining the quantity of money being printed and nothing backing the money. I've asked this question recently just as a precursor to an interesting conversation. If I owed you $20 and I hand you one of these $20 Federal Reserve notes, why is it you accept it as a form of payment? The general answer most people give is, well, it's what we've got and it's what we're used to, and we don't think twice about it because you could take my $20 bill and go spend it at your local supermarket and buy some goods and services. And you have absolute certainty that they will accept it as a form of payment.
They'll take it. Here you go.
But if we strip that away, just the idea that because we're used to it and because it's all we've got, what defines that note as having value? I would argue there basically is one thing.
Confidence.
It's the fact that the U.S. government will always take it for tax payments.
Oh,
And since we always know that the government will require us to pay taxes, we know there is an end user for those dollars. If you became dubious about accepting my method of payment with that $20 bill, you would always know that, well, if I took Fred's 20, I could always give it to my local tax requirement for payment.
house
For federal.
bill.
Now you don't have a state income tax in Texas, is that
No,
right?
no.
That's amazing. Yeah. So it just goes to show that governments can operate without an income tax. In fact, the federal government operated without an income tax until 1913.
Yeah.
Did not require an income tax from the public
Isn't that
from
amazing?
1777 until 1913. Why did
Wow.
they suddenly require an income tax? Because they had created a central bank that was about to start printing money, and they couldn't simply put money into an economy one way without having a way of drawing some of it out. Otherwise, the inflation problem would be obvious and immediate.
That was the real reason, right, Fred, for the income tax.
That was the only reason.
They knew they needed to suck it out because they got the central bank started in 1913, right? Wow.
Absolutely. Which
What
is
a
why
trip.
simultaneously the income tax was established at the exact same time as we created the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah.
So effectively, we could eliminate both. And I think if you did what President Patrick would do and eliminated the Federal Reserve, I think subsequently we could also turn around and eliminate the income tax. However,
Sure, why not?
unfortunately, we have to address the fact that between 1913 and 2022, the government has managed to amass a debt of $32 trillion
Yeah.
and is now paying interest payments that are so large that the interest payments alone are the second largest item on the government's budget.
And this is a fine point, but that number can't be right, is it? I mean, that number's barely moved for the last 5 years. It was like 29 trillion and all this new
Well,
money.
it's
Come on.
increased
I
kind
don't
of
think that's
substantially, but what they're discounting
I don't think that's a
are
good
things
number.
we don't want to include.
Oh, you think?
Okay, so all they're counting is what they call debt held by the public.
Debt held by the
That's the $32 trillion number that they put out.
Is that
that's
Federal
debt.
Reserve debt too? No?
Well, what they don't count are obligations of the federal government that are not due today. So, for example, if Social Security has a deficit of $3 trillion, but the money isn't due until next year, they don't count that. If 170 various government trust funds are owed money that the government is required to pay,
Yeah.
doesn't have the money for right now, but the money isn't due for 2 years, or 3 years, or 5
They
years,
don't count that.
that is not counted. And if you start adding in all the things that the government doesn't count, that $32 trillion number explodes. And, we've heard what it is in reality. I've heard 70 trillion, 65 trillion. The number is massive. And if we really dealt with that reality, then the interest payments would be double what they are now. The need of the government would be more exacerbated than it is today. And even under President Patrick, we wouldn't probably be able to stop the need for an income tax because the government's need to raise revenue is so vast. I don't think it could sustain itself if it didn't have that revenue stream coming in.
Right.
So I don't think the income tax would fade away, even if you were successful in getting rid of the Federal Reserve System as a whole.
Well, and a real issue, I think, that's the kind of the sleeping giant is all these pension funds. We saw there was
Underfunded pension funds.
one pension fund, Fred, that was into this FTX thing, this crazy
Yeah,
crypto
yeah.
bomb thing, which was just a Ponzi scheme of nothing. These kids
Well,
were crazy. So there's one
FTX was using-
pension fund let's see, in Canada where it had $90 million lost on this deal. What are those
Yep.
people going to do?
Nothing. Well, again, if they banked on these cryptos, I'm afraid that was their fault. I've said from the very beginning, I've had concerns about the crypto world because of the nature of it being
Yeah,
unregulated.
but let's not bundle this thing with Bitcoin. This was a whole different thing than Bitcoin.
Yes, this was
Okay.
Alameda. Okay.
Yeah,
FTX
and it was just
was
it was a
trading on.
Ponzi scheme. It was not Bitcoin. Just let's be fair there.
No.
Okay.
What this was FTX used its trading arm, Alameda, to make extremely risky bets.
You think?
And as the bets went against them, they continued to double down and try to make these things work, but eventually got themselves so over leveraged that they had to start selling off whatever assets they had, which were their cryptos and the currencies that they created. And when that wasn't sufficient, people that were holding
They started
this quote-unquote
getting out, right?
asset decided they wanted out. And as multiple people rushed to try to liquidate simultaneously, it became very clear and very obvious that there just simply wasn't enough money, and boom, the massive implosion. You know, it's like a bank run if you isolated a single bank, and all of a sudden, you know, the bank didn't have a backstop. It did not have a banking system or a government or Congress that was providing insurance policies against no FDIC insurance.
So the Alameda was the young girl who was losing a lot of money, that this SB, whatever his name is, he was giving her money to keep her afloat. The Alameda.
Yeah, it was the trading arm of FTX. And, you know, again, they just simply imploded because they took risky bets that they couldn't cover. And again, it got out of control. But the unregulated nature of these cryptos is what creates part of this problem. And I've argued from the beginning that this is a flaw. And when you have an unregulated market, it allows for a lot of things to occur that wouldn't be able to happen in regulated industries. And I think the more that these things blow up, the more that, you know, it's going to lead to Congress wanting, or the public demanding, that all of these quote unquote assets be more heavily regulated to avoid these kinds of
Yeah, but you know, you get the government involved, and they don't know what the hell they're doing. Regulate what? What are you going to regulate? You know, with Bitcoin, Fred, sure, it's just a digital thing, but all people are doing is buying and selling. You don't need a government in there to control that. They already know what, if you got any, right? It's all.
Sure.
It's all.
Yeah, so do.
It's not like you're going to evade taxes with it. But, you know, I'll put on my tinfoil hat. I think this whole thing was a controlled operation. I think that this SBF guy was their patsy, their Lee Harvey Oswald, and that's why you'll see I don't think he'll ever go to jail because he's got cover. I think this was a whole thing to really lower confidence in the whole crypto world. That's my tinfoil hat statement.
Certainly possible.
And boy, just like you just said, people are starting to use the term crypto, right? Bitcoin. They're putting them all together in one basket, and it's going to hurt Bitcoin, whether or not you believe in Bitcoin or not. It's going to hurt them.
Absolutely,
SPF, right?
And that it does represent the nature of the problem. So, you know, the question is, we've decided, for example, you know, again, just to mention Bitcoin as a specific example, the idea was because there was going to be a limit on how many of them could be created.
And there still is.
That established value.
There still is limit.
Okay, so that establishes the value. But the question is, what price does that define the value as? That's left to the open market to decide. It's left to anybody willing to hold Bitcoin. How much is that worth? So, for example, if I could create an item of limited supply, I just make a new item, and I'm going to make, well, it never could be, but we'll call them Fred dollars, and I'm only going to make 1,000 of them, and I somehow indicate that there'll never be another one made. That's it. There'll be 1,000 Fred dollars.
Fred, that's all you got.
Does that automatically give them value? Does that automatically define what value that gives them? Somebody
no more
may
than
say,
the dollar. It's just made up anyway, right?
It's made up, but you know, is there demand for it?
Yeah.
Now, if somebody says, "Well, I like Fred, and I believe that he's financially stable, so maybe I'll hold Fred dollars, and maybe somebody else will believe it." You know, somebody made the funny analogy on CNBC yesterday that cryptos were like Chuck E. Cheese dollars. You know, they're good within Chuck E. Cheese. But take a Chuck E. Cheese dollar and try to spend it at McDonald's. It doesn't work.
Yeah, you know, the whole idea of using cryptos to buy stuff, Andy was on it early on, and it just didn't pan out. It's never panned out, right? I mean,
it's never panned out.
It's just
Jamie Dimon has called it pet rocks. You know, that's how he looks at it.
I mean, people.
But I realize he's the strongest.
It tried to pick up steam
opponent.
at some point, right? Like Tesla would say, "Well, you could buy a Tesla." Nobody even talks about it anymore. You know, about
that quickly faded, right?
That quickly faded, boy. That was quick, wasn't it? Boom, boom.
So therein lies the problem.
Right.
Okay, there is a limited amount, but does that necessarily define the value? And if so,
no, it's just going to be a thing where to buy and sell. The people are going to That's just like any other commodity, right? You buy and sell
right?
it.
But without a functional utility, it has its fundamental problems. So
Yeah.
we'll see in the future how that plays out. And that's why a lot of people look at these central bank digital currencies and they try to put them together. I think they can't be. There is a vast
No, it's going to be
line there
big difference. Yeah.
between these things, between cryptos and a digital currency coming out of a central bank, a government central bank.
You know, and we've got it explained to us by some people in the know that it's not even going to be a currency, Fred. It's going to be a central bank digital coupon.
Well, sure.
So what it's going to be, and with the people that really believe they understand this, it's going to be if they give Fred 500 CBCDs, right? Fred, this is going to be tied into your telephone, your social credit score, your medical records, your credit score, everything, and then they can control what you can buy with those 500, right?
Well,
yeah, this is where they're going, Freddie. You watch them, and then if Fred's got a high cholesterol level, and you go into Safeway and you want to get a pizza with your little D, and they'll have it right there. It's all in a digital. That's what this 5G thing is about. And they say, no, Fred, you know your cholesterol's a little high. You can't buy it with yours. Why don't you can buy that? And that's where they're going. This thing is about control, in my opinion. Totally. Absolute control.
Well, generally speaking, when it comes to the issue and control of money, that is really the end result.
That's the deal,
that is
right?
the end goal, one way
That's
or the other, to control a country. I mean, I remember the arguments over the central banks in 1812 and the fight of Andrew Jackson in the 1830s. Yeah. It was basically that, you know, the European bankers looked at the U.S. and said, okay, you know, we tried militarily to overrun and take over a nation. We lost. You know, we lost the war. So they're independent. You know, we're going to try the War of 1812. We revisited. And again, they were pushed back. They didn't make it. So they kind of accept the notion that, okay, if we can't overrun a country militarily, how else can we control the people within a nation? And then, you know, you have those quotes that have come out. Give me the power to control a nation's currency.
I don't care who makes the laws.
What laws you make, right? So
JP
the idea became very clear that, well, you could certainly control a country if you control their currency. So this battle has been being fought, you know, forever. And the idea of gaining control is the biggest single concern I have about a digital world. It's exactly what you're talking about, is social engineering, not only politically, you know, but for everything from the smallest item down to denying my right to buy a pizza because my cholesterol is too high, to try to shape the political landscape by forcing people to follow a particular trend.
And look what happened with this FTX in Ukraine and the Democratic, all the money that flowed into this election. That's exactly what they did. They were laundering money through Ukraine to support Democrats, you know, a month ago.
So think back about now how smart it looks to have a money system based on gold and silver.
Yeah, you think?
Right?
Wow.
No third-party control. The value is established by the weight of the physical metal itself.
Yes, sir.
It can't be inflated without actually producing more of the actual asset. The public can earn $1 today, put it away for 20 years, and still have the same buying power. And no government can interfere with its marketing value. And why we don't have that as a standard anymore should be something that people question every day. Right. Why we accept the notion of paper money that is unbacked.
But let me ask, before 1933, was that a workable model that you would endorse before 33?
Absolutely.
Okay, it was backed by $1. It was backed by gold. So
and redeemable dollar for dollar. There was no difference in a $20 paper note and a $20 St. Gaudens.
Oh, that was good.
They were identical. You could exchange one for the other anytime you wanted to. It was at your discretion. But the thing is that those notes that you held, those paper notes, you knew they were not merely pieces of unbacked paper. You knew there was something substantive that backed its value, which gave you full confidence to hold them. Why wouldn't you?
But they were still created by the Federal Reserve Bank private rather than the Treasury. So that's where we did lose. We lost the deal then in 13.
We did.
Yeah,
but again, from the public's point of view, that didn't matter.
Yeah, they didn't care, right?
It made no difference because they made the transition seamless because it was still a redeemable asset. It was after 1933 that things began to become clearly different because at that point, the fundamental change was the promise of redeemability was altered.
Yeah.
We were now told that regardless of previous promises, that paper note you're holding is still backed by the gold it was yesterday. You just can't have it.
He just can't have. So
can't
one might
trust
argue
us.
if you're a tinfoil hatter, as I am, that when they did this thing at 13, that they knew that the 33 move was going to happen at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
They had to know, right? What argument did they use in 33, Freddie? Do you know, to say, okay, we're going to no longer let you trade in your dollars for gold? What did they tell the people?
The Great Depression was the problem.
Oh, 1929, and then they said,
Here's
what?
the solution. We have an economic disaster on our hands.
Okay.
We have a massive unemployment problem. We have debt going up like crazy. We have a country that is completely falling apart economically. We have the worst economy we've seen, and there's public outcry for a solution.
Those rascals.
And the resolution was offered. Here's the solution. Allow us to print money backed by gold, but remove your ability to redeem it, and we can print enough money to put the economy back to work and solve this shortage of capital. Because at that point in 33, unlike now, they couldn't simply print money to solve all the economic issues. They had to have gold in reserve to do that first.
Right.
But there wasn't a sufficient supply of gold. And those that had the paper money were redeeming it for the actual gold as this problem became clearer and clearer. Mostly it was the central bankers first online. Because as you said, even as early as 1913, they knew where this was going.
They knew. Wow.
So when this problem became really dramatic, it was the bankers first online at the Treasury window looking to redeem all these notes for the gold. But the issue was then, to prevent a note from being redeemed more than once, if they did turn in a $100 or $20 bill for its equivalent gold value, the note was destroyed.
Oh, they just burned it. Wow.
Ripped it, turned it, burned it, destroyed it completely. So what happened is that you've got a two-way vacuum. All the money turned into the Treasury being destroyed, all the gold being sucked out of the Treasury's supply, left two things simultaneously. A literal absence of cash. There was technically and literally no money in the economy. People literally did not have physical paper money.
Let me see if I understand. You're saying that there are people that knew this was happening, and that's how they created the Great Depression. They sucked the money out.
The biggest creation of it was the redemption of notes for gold. An subsequent absence of cash in an open economy, people couldn't get paid. Employers literally did not have the physical money to give to employees to make their payments. They couldn't put deposits in their bank to write checks. There literally was no money in circulation. That's a depression by definition.
So how did the people know with just some limited newspapers and stuff that this was going on and they were really turning in your dollars? How did they know?
Well, President Roosevelt issued a direct statement and an executive order in 1933 and made that statement public. It was
I understand. But my question was, how did the people know that they wanted to get this gold now because this thing was going to end?
Well, a lot didn't. It was those that were in power and who had the understanding ahead of time.
The in crowd, right?
See a rat. Yeah, they smelled the rat. But it was the central bankers first. Because they knew what they had done. And they didn't want to get caught holding the paper money they knew they had destroyed. So they were first online to redeem the gold.
God.
So now the public is left with this absence of cash. The Depression has gone on for years. And suddenly we have offered now a solution. The solution is, I can solve this economic problem if you are willing to accept the following. You'll have your paper money. It'll be backed by gold. Just don't ask for it. If you accept the idea that we promise to sustain this relative relationship between the amount of gold reserves and the amount of paper in circulation, we can move forward. And the public went for it.
They went for it. Well,
Why
what were they
wouldn't
going to do, though? Really, I mean, were they the public? They couldn't have said no. They're just going to do
no,
it, right?
there was no chance. And they wouldn't have, because everybody wanted the Depression to end.
Right.
So we went forward and accepted that notion. And very quickly, that promise to sustain the relationship between gold and the amount of paper money, since the public couldn't redeem it anymore, began to get wider and wider. Suddenly there was more and more money being created, and the quantity of gold against the amount of money started to get wider and wider and wider.
Here we
By the
are.
1950s and 60s, we were down to maybe 70% and 60%. By 1970, it got so bad, it became clear that we couldn't possibly argue that we had enough gold or silver to back the amount of money that we printed. So at that point, we simply made the announcement that, okay, here's the new game. First, we had our gold-backed money redeemable whenever you want. Then we had our gold-backed money not redeemable, but promised to be backed by gold. Now we're simply just going to have paper money unbacked. And guess what? You're just going to have to accept the idea. We won't go nuts printing money.
But between 33 and 72, my understanding that people outside the country could get their gold.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's what really happened when Nixon took the thing off the gold standard in 72, right?
Sure, and that's why from 33 to 71, you didn't see any pushback from foreign countries. They weren't concerned about the problem because they could still redeem those U.S. dollars for gold. But by 1971, when they were told suddenly that window was closing, imagine how aggravated the oil-producing countries, which have been forced to stockpile billions and billions of U.S. dollars.
And they said, we can't get our gold?
Cash pile that's backed by gold, and now suddenly it's not. And you just have to accept that? Did you think that was just going to go by unnoticed? Well, we had strong pushback, and it created a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I think wasn't that what the Arab oil embargo thing was about in 72 or 71?
That was the response of the oil-producing countries to being told suddenly that, hey, you know, I know we burned you, but sorry.
That's right. What did they tell us? I don't recall. I was around, of course, in 72 working at a St. Louis radio station and remember the gas lines. But I don't remember what we were sold on the news, why that was. Do you remember what they said?
Basically, it was just merely a conversation that was tried to be made very subtly that simply suggested that, well, you know, we don't really need this old gold silver standard nonsense anymore. It's antiquated and unnecessary. A government needs to have a little more flexibility in its currency, and the only way to establish that is to give us the freedom to be able to print money that's unbacked. But you can trust us. We won't go awry with this new ability to simply print money.
So what was the argument they told us on the news of why there were gas lines?
I think that was simply they blamed
the bad
oil people. But yeah, the argument was it was just the bad oil people, being nasty and being greedy. That's all. They were being greedy and they wanted to raise the price of oil, and he didn't want that to happen.
Yeah, I think I remember that. This is an email from Kevin. Since we could never go back to a metal-backed currency in today's world, decentralized digital money is the best we can do, right?
Well, I don't know that it changes anything. All right. So the way I see it, let's say tomorrow we had a central bank digital currency instead of paper notes. What would change effectively from the public standpoint is really nothing, right? So if I go, for example, and use my credit card today, there's no cash transfer there. There's no cash involved in that transaction. Nope. Merchant takes my credit card number. I take the goods and services home. At some point, I get a bill from my credit card company. I write a check, which comes out of my checking account. Again, nothing has changed in terms of.
And as you know, Fred, you've taught us, and Andrew, that it's all digital anyway. 96% of these dollars are all just blips on your computer. That's all they are.
Sure.
That's all they are.
So the only thing that changes is the way the money looks. So instead of getting paid and taking a check to my bank and cashing it, and the banker handing me $100 bills.
Right.
Instead, I will see a credit of X amount of central bank digital currency, let's call them dollars, that have now been added to whatever I'm carrying. Maybe it's on my phone, or maybe it's a card, or however that's going to physically function. That technology has yet to be exactly defined or developed. That's why I think it's going to be about a decade, because I think there's going to be an issue of getting the public recognizing how this is going to work, and getting elderly people to understand how money is now being transferred to them. And then all the people that are holding cash, they're going to have to subtly say, what are they going to do? Give us a cutoff point and tell us that
Right.
got cash, it's not going to be any good after a certain date, and it all has to be turned into these digital dollars. That itself is going to create a huge number of problems.
Yeah, and the smart money is saying that it's going to be just like they do in Japan or China, and everything. I don't know if I've seen some documentaries. These people in China buy everything on their phone. They got this little, what do they call that thing? It's you know what I mean? That thing on your phone.
Yeah,
I don't.
A little reader on the phone. Yeah.
Yeah, if you return something to Amazon, and I could actually get on my phone, which takes me 4 hours, then I can go to, you go to UPS, and then you just put this thing, and then it's done. This is how they buy everything in China and Japan.
Sure.
This is where they're going. This is what they're going to do. Right?
Are a little more technologically advanced in the U.S. We are lagging a little bit. And, again, think about this. We have an entire generation in America that has never written a check.
Yeah.
Never.
No.
Not one payment they've ever made for anything in their life has been by virtue of taking a checkbook, writing out a check to somebody. If you handed a checkbook to most 20-year-olds, I don't think they would know what to do with it.
And I would argue, too, that most people under 40, they've got this phone thing, right? They got this phone thing down, and they all use it. I don't know how to do it. I don't want to play with it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Apple Pay or,
Sure.
Stripe payments or however they're doing it. It is the method they have become accustomed to.
And
everything is all digital to them anyway. So for them, the perception will be
nothing
subtle. They won't see a big change. Now, you and I know behind the scenes how dramatically, though, it changes the nature of the economy.
Oh, yeah.
Because first of all, and most critically, every single transaction is now visible.
Everything.
There are no more private transactions. From the cab driver taking the cash payment to two people meeting in a parking lot, handing goods and services and handing cash to each other, every transaction now becomes visible. How that translates in the future, is left to the powers that be and how much they want to utilize that new ability and power.
But like you said before, information is the new commodity. That's information.
Is the new commodity.
That's information, yeah.
Wow. I mean, what that leads to potentially is sort of, from a conspiracy theory standpoint, it opens up a whole plethora of potential issues. But I hate the idea that we lose the transparency of the amount of money that exists. We can't count it anymore. Right now, you and I can still go to the Federal Reserve's economic data.
We can look a little bit, right? We don't know. Even then, we don't know, do we, Fred? How much is out there?
Presuming we can trust that data to be accurate, we've accepted the notion that that's truth. That is gone now.
Yeah.
And what does that leave us with as an economy? An entire economy based upon every visible transaction being noted by a government. What would prevent them from wanting to utilize that information to shape, economic play?
Well, you know that it's not going to prevent them. That's what they want to do. I mean, come on, that's what they want.
No matter how much you want to sort of suppress the idea that that's their intent, that temptation seems to me to be fairly large.
Yeah, I think so.
How would I not want to utilize the information if suddenly I knew everything you did with every dollar you use? How would I not want to utilize that information to my benefit?
So I'm kind of thinking that maybe paper dollars and gold and silver coins would be the way to have, and in our underwear drawer, in our safe, Because, with paper dollars, as you said, no matter what they do, they're going to be good for a long, long time, right? I mean, literally
The only
paper.
difference is they will buy less.
Yeah.
So the paper dollar is going to
then less than the gold. Sure. Yeah.
is subject to a change against itself. It's going to buy perpetually less
Of course.
as time marches on, one way or the other.
But at least you're not in the
Whereas-
bank, right? At least you're not in the bank. God knows what will happen to that. There's people that are conjecturing that if you have money in the bank and they do this CBD thing, that they're going to force you to switch over. It's not even going to be optional.
Oh yeah, it'll happen without your willingness.
Do you believe that?
They're not going to offer you an option. It's not going to be a choice.
Wait a minute.
It's going to be
so they're just going to switch them over?
Decree.
Your USDs are going to be CBDCs?
That's all, and that's it.
That's ugly.
We'll just have to accept that notion, which again, I think they'll have to filter over time.
Well, yeah.
Give people an opportunity. I just wonder how that's going to play out. What's going to happen to all the underground money? Are people suddenly going to be willing to admit they have all this cash that they've had?
Way.
Is the IRS going to be standing there looking now for all this money to come up from underground and, be standing there with their hand out saying, well, wait a minute, we want our fair share of taxes on that money.
It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
It's going to be a mess, right? Yeah. So let's kind of wrap up, and so let's wax forward philosophically. So let's say we are into a mess 2 years from now, super mess, whatever, worse than it is today, which looks like we will be. What about these gold and silver coins that we buy from Fred? Are we going to be okay with these guys? Are we going to be able to sell them? I'm putting your telephone number up. Are we going to be able to sell these somewhere if we want to have food and we've got, you know what I'm saying?
Well, no doubt about it. I mean, we'll be converting them into whatever the currency du jour is. They're not going to be directly used themselves as a method of conducting commerce, rather as a store of value until such time as they're needed to be used. And then you convert them into whatever the currency of the day will be. But their value will grow as the value of them against the other forms of quote-unquote currencies is going to perpetually change. For the same reason that a $20 gold coin no longer costs either $20 like it did in 33, $35 like it did in 71, $100 like it did in 78, but now $2,500 for a mint condition $20 gold coin. It will continually buy more goods and services moving forward as these other quote-unquote currencies are, again, filtered through and are inflated heavily.
Which is the whole point of real money, gold and silver.
It is the whole
that is
point
going to, traditionally, it's always gone up in value. It's never gone down. And currencies, digital or paper, have always gone down. Oh,
absolutely. And they will get much worse if we move all digital. And as the government debt rises, and as the need for government spending continues to grow, all these things together, even if there isn't another exogenous event years from now that we can't predict today, like COVID or something else that we can't see coming, or another 2008 debacle, I believe there will be more of these kinds of events happening more frequently going forward, because again, I believe there's a massive gap between reality and perception that is going to keep biting us in the ass from time to time.
Yeah.
And the problems have gotten so big and the numbers are so large that they're not going to be minor blips. They're going to be major overturns in the economic environment. So we should be prepared. And if I've learned one thing after 38 or 39 years, diversifying one's assets to include some physical wealth has been a safe haven and a wealth protection method that has been proven successful. And I would definitely encourage people who are sitting on any quantities of cash to not hold on to that if it's money you don't plan on using for the next 5 years. Put it now into physical assets like gold and silver coins that they cannot produce more of. Like the crypto, we understand there are no more that can be made. But the difference with the actual American gold and silver coins, we don't have to figure out whether or not there will be a value, whether there will be demand, whether there will be interest in people who want these. That already exists and has since the 1790s. That demand's already there and tremendous and growing against the supply that is known.
That's a pretty strong track record. And so the question that comes up every now and then is, well, if things really get silly, let's just use that term, are there always going to be people that want to buy these gold and silver coins? And
Well, the more silly things get, the more demand there will be.
The more there is. Tell folks why that is.
Well, think about the small percentage of people in America now holding gold and silver. It's a minor, small, tiny
macro, right? Macro.
And if more people lose confidence in their paper money, they're going to look to an alternative. As an example, look at what happened around the world when their currencies around the world were faltering. They looked for an alternative.
And some other South American place actually went to Bitcoin, because they didn't
anything.
They didn't anything, anything but their pesos, right? Yeah.
And a lot of this demand is going to go into American gold and silver coins because it's going to make sense to people to buy something that has this proven track record, that is a government-issued currency, that is made of a perfectly intrinsic metal that has value, something that's been around, gold and silver, for thousands of years as a method of storing wealth and money for good reason, because it has certain properties that give it value that already exist. And we don't have
limited value, right? Hard to get out of the ground, and transportable, and it's hard to destroy.
Divisible, and it can be divided. Huh. You can take an ounce of gold and stretch it into a mile-wide wire. You could take an ounce of gold and cut it in half, and the equal parts are worth exactly half of the whole. And it can be reassembled back to its original form without losing any value.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, which is why you and Andy got into this thing 40 years ago, right? You kind of knew it. You kind of
just fascinated by the idea that we have a fixed supply, real valued currency that exists. Mm-hmm. And as long as it's available, the public should take that opportunity at heart and own it themselves. Own this physical asset, the end product. It's not a derivative against something else. It is this something else. It is the thing that actually is of value, not a representation of something that purports to have value or something we have to speculate of the nature of its value.
In your business, U.S. Coin Capital, have you talked to people 6 months or a year that are beginning to get this, and is your business growing because of this?
More and more every day.
Really?
I mean, the number of people that are waking up to this on a regular basis is phenomenal.
Wow.
I've never seen such a rapid increase in the concern of the general public about the form of money since the 1970s. It is just really coming to a point at which people are paying attention. And unfortunately, it happens because of exacerbated events. Like we needed to have a 9% inflation rate before people woke up and said, well, wait a minute.
Yeah,
this is insane.
What's going on here?
What's going on? So they start backtracking. And if they do that, they just keep on rolling back and eventually come to the understanding of what created this problem in the first place. And then they come to understand it all boils down to this fundamental flaw of paper money. It just exists as a form of currency with a fundamental problem. That problem being it does not retain value over time. Understanding that, everybody should recognize, why would you store your wealth in a form you know will not retain the same value over time?
You just know.
You know that's going to happen in the future. It's going to get weaker. So I'm not suggesting people divorce themselves of all of their money, but a percentage of what you're putting away should be in the physical, tangible form. I have put together a couple of really cool specials.
I've got them here. Yeah, look at this. Yeah, kind of fun. So tell folks what we got. And you can go on US Coin Capital, uscoincapital.com, and then go into specials, and then you can look at these.
Three, which are available, and I will say this, it is as long as supplies last issue.
You only got a limited supply.
Three really cool specials for people, just, for the holiday stuff, for a lot of people that like to do this for holiday reasons. A lot of people give this stuff away as gifts or to help educate new people. A lot of people say, I'm buying a bunch of these because I want people to see what a real silver dollar looks like. So I give these away to my nieces, my nephews, my family members, my coworkers. And then there are those that are, again, at this point thinking about it's the end of the year. I think I should be doing something to diversify my wealth because we're really worried about what 2023 is going to bring. So, three wonderful little specials. Silver Special #1 includes a roll of the peace dollars that are all uncirculated, just have never been graded, so they're just what we call raw coins.
They're beautiful.
In a roll, 20 coins. Along with that, some that have actually been graded and certified, Mint State 63s. That package is $1,120. Then we have a gold and silver package that we put together that includes one each of the different varieties of American $10 gold coins. The Indian head gold coin, the Liberty head gold coin, both have been graded by NGC as Mint State 63, a good solid mint condition coin, sealed in the NGC holders, and along with that, some Mint State 65 graded Morgan silver dollars. Nearly pristine coins. It's a great little package, just under $6,000, $59.95. And then for those that are looking to add some gold, I have a number of these completed 8-piece gold sets.
8-piece gold set, wow.
The $2.5, $5, $10, and $20 of the Liberty head design. So those are all prior to 1907. And then after the switch of design to the Indian heads, we have one of each of the Indian head gold pieces, the $2.5, $5, $10, and of course the $20 known as a St. Gaudens. So it's one of each of the Indian head and Liberty head type coins, 8 coins total. It's known as the 8-piece gold set. All of those NGC graded as MS64, and that package is available for $15,000.
So if you go to uscoincapital.com and look under special offers, you'll see pictures of all these and everything. We really did a nice job laying that thing out. So on this holiday special, are these little guys all in individual plastic?
On the 8-piece gold set, everyone is NGC graded.
Okay.
Everything else is as pictured.
Okay.
All the silver coins that are in the original #1 package, the ones that are graded are the Mint State examples, MS63 piece dollars. The others that are uncirculated are just in a roll. They are not graded, but they are all uncirculated.
The first ones be good for kids and grandkids, right? Something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Stocking stuffers, as they say. Yeah, that's pretty fun.
Or just an inexpensive way to buy a little silver to put away for your future.
Sure. Yeah, it is very nice.
As we watch the prices of these things continue to climb this year, premiums, interestingly, have finally subsided a bit on the pre-64, pre-65 dimes, quarters, and halves. I think that's something that we can take advantage of, too, at this point. I do have regular bags of what we always refer to as junk silver available, slightly less premium than we saw over the summer. I think, again, that's one of these things that just happens temporarily from time to time. Yeah. But the price of silver is going up, so it's sort of about evened out. But anyway, lots of good opportunities for people to acquire some physical wealth these days.
We're off to 2023, and if you
Hard to believe the year's over.
Yeah, if you believe anything that some of these top-line gurus, the Rubinis of the world, Jamie Dimons, all the other ones, man, there's not a whole lot of really bullish people out there about what's going to happen.
People listen to Jeremy Siegel, Jeffrey Gunlack.
Yeah.
These guys
they're smart,
well-versed. They really understand what's happening, and they're immune to, I think, what is this prevalent nonsense of distractions that help people almost ignore a lot of what's happening in the economy. And again, I will bring up the idea that I believe going forward, I barely make predictions. I think I made one in the last episode about I thought the dollar index had peaked.
Right.
I think at this point now, if I'm going to say anything about 2023, it's going to be that quantitative tightening is going to be a much bigger problem than economic people are anticipating.
The idea that the Fed believes that they have to sell off some of these treasury bonds and nobody wants to buy them. That's the problem.
Right. That they're going to somehow diverse themselves of trillions of dollars of treasuries in an economy where the government is trying to raise money simultaneously because it's blowing through money at a higher pace than ever before.
Right.
And this debt to GDP ratio should not be ignored. When a government is spending $1.20 for every dollar it brings in, this is a huge problem. And remember, the IMF defines a country in a problem if the 77% GDP to debt ratio is achieved. If we're spending 77% of the money we bring in paying off our debt, beyond that, it is considered a huge problem. And yet we are now 120% of our GDP to our debt ratio.
Are there other countries in this sad of shape as far as GDP ratios? Do you know?
Yeah, most of them don't survive very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and their internal problems tend to implode and end up with, massive public outcry, rallies in the streets. I mean, huge outcries from the public as they begin to feel the impact, because unlike the United States, most other foreign countries don't have the backstop of having their currency as the world's reserve currency.
Yeah.
We can get away with this for longer.
Because people want our dollars around the world.
They have to buy our dollars. We don't leave them an option. And if I were a conspiracy-minded person, I can easily suggest that this dollar rally we saw over the summer was a strong-arming effort of the central bank to push other industries, banking systems, to accumulate U.S. dollars. I think to precursor the fact that we're about to experience a weaker U.S. dollar.
Central banks may know something. The World Gold Council is out this morning saying that 31 tons of gold were purchased by the central banks just in October alone. And all the Mideast countries are the biggest buyers. UAE, Pakistan, all those countries. They understand gold more than...
I think so.
Yeah.
And again, with all the money out there floating around and everybody inflating their currency, if you know that the currency is being inflated, you want to stockpile something besides it. And if you don't want to be force-fed U.S. dollars, you're going to look for other options. And listen, there's a reason gold and silver have been around for thousands of years. The reason people believe in it as a method of being a wealth protection asset, I firmly believe in it, and I have a lot more faith in the future value of a mint condition $20 gold coin that cannot be reproduced, and I haven't minted one since 1933, than I do in the value of, cash money that I earn.
Of course, yeah. So that's what Fred does for a living. I'll show you his number again, and you can just give him a call and talk to Fred or some of his team, one of his team, 800-878-2646.